Thank you for tuning in. My name is Cassie Riva. I'm the events coordinator at an Unlikely Story bookstore in Plainville. Before we start, I wanted to give you a few technical tips. If you have any issues with video or audio quality, try refreshing your page. And if that doesn't work, just close out of it and log back in using Google Chrome as your browser. We're also streaming this live on our Facebook and Twitter page, so you can always watch there. Any questions for the author can be written in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to buy Anne's books, there's a green button at the bottom of your screen that's going to take you right to our website. And when you purchase Dear Edward from An Unlikely Story, you're going to receive an autographed book plate from Anne. So I picked up this book and started reading it last week, and I think it's my favorite book this year. It's called Dear Edward, and it's about a 12-year-old boy, Edward, who you find out in the second chapter is the sole survivor of a horrific plane crash that kills everyone on board, including his family. Edward's life is completely turned upside down when he loses everything he knew. Now living with his aunt and uncle in New Jersey, Edward has to find the strength to move on and find meaning. This book is beautiful in every way imaginable. The characters are charismatic and unforgettable. The setup for the story is just phenomenal. The book really makes you stop and think of what it means not just to survive, but to truly live. The best thing I can compare it to is watching the movie Titanic for the first time, and you know the ship's going to sink, but you get so invested with the characters and the storyline anyway, and it's just such an incredible journey. You're not going to be able to put this book down. Dear Edward was an instant New York Times bestseller and currently has 26 international publishers and was named one of the best books of 2020 by the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Women's World, Parade, and Library Reads. I am so thrilled to introduce the author, Napolitano. Anne is the author of the novels A Good Hard Look, which was an indie next pick, and her other book, Within Arm's Reach, which was adapted and staged as a theatrical production in New York City in 2014. Anne is the associate editor of One Story Literary Magazine. In 2019, Anne was longlisted for the Simpson Joyce Carol Oates Literary Prize. Now she lives in Brooklyn with her husband and children. Tonight, Anne is being joined by her editor, Whitney Frick, and agent, Julie Barer. Whitney Frick is the editorial director at Dial Press. She was previously an executive editor at Flatiron Books and an editor at Scribner, where she published countless New York Times bestsellers, including Love Warrior by Glennon Doyle and The 100-Foot Journey by Richard C. Maurice, which was adapted into a feature film starring Helen Mirren and produced by Steven Spielberg. Julie Barer began her career as a bookseller at Shakespeare & Company, where she discovered the joy of putting books into people's hands. She started her own agency, Barer Literary, in 2004, and represents a variety of writers across the literary spectrum, with a special emphasis on fiction. Julie's clients have been finalists and winners of numerous grants and prizes, including the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Man Booker Prize, and the Penn Hemingway Award. Without further ado, Anne, Whitney, Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. You guys are in for a treat tonight. I just spent about 15 minutes with them in the green room, and it was so much fun. You guys are going to have great.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. Thanks so much to An Unlikely Story. I am very happy to be here with my beloved agent and editor. It's way better than doing an event by myself. And so I'm going to start because chronologically it makes sense for me to start. We're going to tell you sort of the story of Dear Edward at each step. So I thought I would start with telling you about sort of my publishing history that led to Dear Edward, which had ups and downs. And so I wrote my first novel when I was in graduate school. I got my MFA at New York University, and I wrote a novel while I was there, and it was terrible. And I think I really needed to write a novel in order to figure out how to write a novel. Like learning how to sustain a story over 300 pages is not something that you innately know how to do. So I wrote a terrible novel to figure it out. And I sent it out. I didn't think it was terrible at the time. And it was rejected by 80 agents. Some of them wrote something nice in the margin of their form letter, but it was very rejected. And so I got a job as a personal assistant to support myself after graduate school. And I wrote another novel. And that one, when I finished it, I sent it out again to agents. And I had 3 agents that wanted to represent me. So I was like, I felt very like, this is it, it's happening. I'm finally here. This is what I've always wanted to do. And I chose the one of the 3 agents that I was most excited about. It was not Julie. I think Julie was like, you were like a baby agent at the time. You weren't even like in the book, like to find. And so I signed with a woman named Elaine Coster, who was a great agent and formerly a publisher before that. And she had the novel that she really liked of mine, and she sent it out to publishers. And it went through a few rounds where like the agent sends it to like 7 editors and they reject it, and she sends it to another 7. And it ended up not selling. There was one editor who almost bought it, and then her boss went on maternity leave, and so it didn't go through. And that was really depressing because I had now written 2 novels, and I am not a short story writer. I've written 1 short story probably in my life in college. And since then, everything got longer and longer, and I'm very clearly a novelist. So at the age of like 27, everyone knew that I wanted to be a writer. So I felt like I was failing with like a big capital F, and I didn't know what else to do. I didn't really have a plan B. This is like what I had wanted to do. And my father was sending me brochures for law school in the mail, and he signed me up to take a very expensive career assessment test that took all day, where you fill in little bubbles. And I answered it like completely wrong, because I thought about every question being like, I want to be a writer. So it'd be like, do you want to do the same thing all day? And I would be like, yes, I want to write all day, but like widgets into like factory pieces all day. So it said that I should be a park ranger at the end. And I lived in New York City, and this was like completely unhelpful information. So during that period, I started writing again because I was depressed, and it was the only thing that made me feel better. So I started writing another book just to sort of climb out of the hole that not selling a book had put me in. And that was actually a huge weight lifted off my shoulders at that point, because I realized that I was going to keep writing whether I published or not. And I assumed at that point that I would not publish, but I knew now that it was part of who I was, and that, like brushing my teeth and eating, it was something that I had to do to feel like a mentally healthy, whole, sort of best version of myself. And that was like a huge weight. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. We'll see what happens. And so I continued writing the book that I started writing while I was depressed. And that was the book that sold. And that was called Within Arm's Reach. So that was my first novel, and I sold it when I think I was 31. And then I started writing another novel, and I thought each of my books that far actually had taken about 2 years. And I was like, well, this will take me 2 years, and I had made enough money within arm's reach that if I lived frugally and I didn't have kids or anything at that point, that for like 2 years I would be okay. So I quit my personal assistant job. Never a good idea.
Never quit your job.
Never quit your day job. This was complicated. So there were other reasons, but I quit my day job. And then it took me 7 years to write that book. And I really fought it. And Flannery O'Connor, the real short story writer, was in it. And I did not want Flannery to be in the book. And it was like a boot camp or like a graduate school, just writing that book and trying to figure out how to make it work. It was like another leap for me, but it was a very long, slow leap. And when I finished that book, Elaine sold it to Penguin Press. And then shortly after she sold it, I found out that she had been sick, and she had been sick for some time, but she wasn't really telling anyone. And so she died shortly after selling A Good Hard Luck. And that was obviously very sad and unexpected for me. And it put me in a professional position that was sort of confusing, because you need an agent to sell your book, but you actually also need an advocate to help you once it's sold, to go through the pre-production process of the book, the editing, the marketing, publicity, all these stages that agents and editors know about and writers not so much. So I needed an agent to help me, but I was in this place where Elaine had sold the book. So whatever agent helped me wasn't going to get any money. And this made me very uncomfortable, but I didn't have really an alternative. So I had a really good friend who was an agent, and some writer friends, and they suggested like 3 agents to me. And one of them was Julie. And so she read A Good Hard Luck. And we met for lunch, and I loved her like immediately. And my prior agent had been like older and brusque and kind of intimidating, and I really liked her. And Julie was like crying at lunch to me about how much she loved the book. And we were talking about our lives, and I was like, oh my God, I feel so like happy in this place. This is wonderful. And I apologized to her like 27 times for not making her any money. Because I think I knew it was going to take me a long time to write another book and for her to make any money for me at all. But Julie helped me through the whole process of A Good Hard Look, which was great. And then I started writing another project, and that was Dear Edward. And the genesis of it was that I became obsessed with a story that was in the news. There was a real plane crash in 2010, and it was a flight from South Africa bound for London, and it crashed in Libya. And there was only one survivor, and it was a 9-year-old Dutch boy. And they found him about a half-mile away from the rest of the wreckage, and he was still strapped into his airplane seat. And he had a punctured lung and a broken leg, but he was otherwise completely fine. And everyone else on board, including his parents and his brother, had died immediately. And this was a huge international story, on the cover of every newspaper, 24/7 news, but I couldn't read enough about it. And so I knew from like the stickiness of that obsession and the fact that I had no prior inclination towards planes, plane crashes, anything like that, I would not even really want to read a book about a plane crash, like given my normal reading habits. So I knew by this feeling that there was something about this story that I needed to tell. And so I started writing it, and it took me 8 years. And I'm slow, and I had 2 babies at the beginning of it. I mean, they were young.
Yeah, you're not that slow, but you had a job, which was raising your children.
Yes. And I did other stuff to make money and all that kind of stuff. So it took me 8 years to write it. And I probably wrote it for a year longer than I should have because I loved writing it so much. Like A Good Hard Look had been like this arduous, like struggle the whole time. And Dear Edward was, it's counterintuitive since the story is so sad, but it was a really joyful experience for me to write it. I loved writing it. I loved being in Edward and being surrounded by all the kindness in this world. It was really nourishing. And so I kind of wrote it for like a year longer than I should have, just to stay in it. And also because I didn't think it was going to sell. So I finally gave it to Julie at like Thanksgiving one year, I don't know, years. And she really kindly read it in like 4 days, which is like the nicest thing that an agent can do because you don't have to wait. It's like a gift. It's a huge gift. And she really liked it, and we met for lunch.
She really liked it. She really liked it.
That's your story, Julie. Not mine. She said nice things, and we met for lunch at a Italian restaurant in Manhattan in Chelsea, and near her offices. And she gave me notes. I took notes during lunch while she talked, and then she said it's going to take you 6 to 8 months to incorporate these notes, and I was like, that's very precise, and she was totally right. It took me 6 months. And then I gave it to her again in May. And then things moved really quickly, actually. And there's this like delightful, it's so weird because you write it when you write. I have 2 writer friends who I went to graduate school, Helen Ellis, who I think is here. Hi, Helen. And Hannah Tinty. And we read each other's work, our first drafts, but no one else had read my book. I don't even think my husband had read it at that point. And so bringing like,
I hadn't read the first draft. I remember.
Okay. Yeah. No.
I mean the draft, not the first draft, but the draft you sent me. He had not.
That's right. He's best saved to the end. He's a very good reader, but not for early drafts. It's unpleasant for everyone. So then Julie was in on the process, and she was calling me at like different times of the day and being like, "What do you think we should do with this scene?" And like, I think you should move that here. Because she wanted to send it out before the summer, because like publishing gets slower during the summer, so there was this window before that started, and then it's Julie's part.
Yay! Thank you everybody for joining us. This is so fun. I love taking our show on the road. Not every agent, editor, author relationship is as dreamy as ours, but we have a special thing, and so it's just it's really a pleasure to revisit this process with you two, because it was so special and continues to be. And I feel really grateful. And I knew the minute I read A Good Hard Look. I mean, I think sometimes you read a book and you just feel like whatever this person writes, I'm in. I'm in for the journey. I'm with you, and I don't care where it takes me. I know it's going to take me somewhere wonderful. And that's how I felt when I read Anne's first book. And I don't know if I believed her when she said it was going to shake them all. But I also did not care. I mean, I knew whatever came of it when it eventually was ready was going to be magical, and it was. And I can't describe, I've said this before, but it's like hard to describe the feeling of like when you get a book that almost nobody else has read. And I think Whitney knows this feeling too. And it's like you're reading it knowing that just a very few number of people have read it and know how incredibly special and magical and wonderful it is. And I finished Your Everett, and I was like, my heart was so full. And it sounds like a really sad book, but I think for those of you who have read it, it's so full of hope, and it's so full of love and human connection, and like why we're here on Earth, why we have each other. And I finished it, and I was just so clear about how people were going to love it so much that it was like I was so impatient. And we had that wonderful lunch at that lovely restaurant that I really hope is still open. Yeah. And that is part, like, I mean, you were so great, Anne, because you had no ego about that process. You were willing to hear so much feedback and take it in. And it's really exciting for me as an agent to be able to say, like, here are some of my ideas, and here's what I connected with, and here's what I had questions about. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Nope. I feel like what's magical is when you give feedback to a writer and you say, like, I didn't really understand why this character made this choice in this scene, and then they take it and they show you all these things, like they answer your question, but not in the way that you expected. And I think that Anne is able to do that because she spent so much time with the book, and she had written the book out into the future, into all these ways, and she knew these characters so well, so that if you were like, why did John and Lacey make this choice? She's like, oh, well, because here's this whole story that's not in the book, but I like know everything about John and Lacey. So we had a lot of fun, I feel like, doing those edits, and we talked a lot about, like, should the book, you know, Anne had it at one point going farther into Edward's future, and where we should. We did these rounds of edits, and then, you know, sending it out was an incredibly exciting part, because it's just really fun as an agent to know. I mean, you never really know, but you kind of feel like you know when people are going to connect with a book. And I really had a great feeling about Whitney and this novel. Whitney had recently taken over Dial Press and had been mentored by an incredible legend in publishing who was also my mentor, Susan Campbell. And I knew that she was looking for books that were driven by the heart. That was something that she told me she really wanted to do, and that described this book so perfectly. And so we went out, you know, with the book. We had a huge response. We had a lot of editors interested. But I kind of knew in my heart that Whitney was going to fall in love with it. Okay, your turn.
Okay, my turn. Also, I just want to thank Unlikely Story for hosting this event. Publishers could not do what we do, and we really couldn't do it during COVID without support like the support Unlikely Story is showing us tonight. So thank you. Okay, so Julie called me. I was at my desk back when we used to go to an office, and she said, when you came to relaunch the Dial Press, which had been an imprint within the Random House group for many years and has sort of fallen dormant as it got folded into the larger Random House identity. And as Julie said, the publisher of Random House, Susan Campbell, was my mentor, and she brought me over to come and relaunch Dial. And she said to me, you're gonna have to center this imprint, this publishing list around a certain sensibility and around a certain idea. And I said, I want to build a list of books that are driven by the heart. I had this feeling that, I mean, what I love most is to read a book that feels, that evokes a deep emotional response in the reader. And in the same way that Julie said that there's something so special about reading something that you know very few people have gotten to read, there's something so special, and there's such privilege in being a publisher and knowing that your job is to press it into the hands of as many people as possible. And the books that I love doing that for and to the most are the books that have really made me feel something, feel big emotions. So, you know, what editors do is we go around town and we have lunch with agents and we tell them, like, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I want to do. And I had been saying books driven by the heart, books driven by the heart. So on a Thursday morning in June of 2018, Julie called and said, I have a novel driven by the heart for you. And when Julie calls and says that, you listen. And so I chatted with her about it. I got up, I shut my door, I printed it, and I sat down and started reading. I read most of it that afternoon. I brought the rest home and read it that night finished it that night after my kids went to bed, and I was crying, and I ran to the office the next day and burst into Susan's office and said, I have the novel that we are going to use to relaunch the Dial Press. This is the novel that will show what we want to do. And she was like, that's wonderful. What is it about? And I was like, it's about a plane crash. And she was like, no. And I was like, I'm not doing it justice. It's not about a plane crash. It's about hope and resilience and connection. It's about after a plane crash, how you find meaning in life. And so she read it over the weekend. And first thing Monday morning, I called Julie and said, okay, I really, really want to publish this novel. So let's talk about what that's going to look like. And Julie said, well, you're not the first person who's called me. I'm juggling lots of interest. I mean, I think already at that point, people were like sending Anne gifts. So we convinced, I don't know how much convincing we had to do, but we convinced you to take meetings. And we felt like if we could get you to come in and meet, that would help. And then on top of that, Susan said, you know, Anne is a real writer. She's not going to care if we parade the marketing and publicity crew in front of her. What's going to really matter to her is if she understands how committed we are to helping her make this the best novel it can be, and to helping her solidify her vision of the book. So see if they'll come in for lunch. See if you can get Julie to arrange her schedule so we can buy them lunch. And so, you know, I convinced you, Julie, to like schedule everybody else around us
for lunch
so that you could be in my
sushi. It was very.
You sent me, everyone was sending me the sushi menu like the night before, and I was like, this is very expensive sushi, Julie. It's random house.
Just make your sushi out.
I know. I was like, oh, okay.
God, those days seem very long ago.
Very long.
So you came in and we sat in my little office. We like pulled up at the table and we ate sushi and we talked about this novel. And it was so, I mean, like Julie, you said this, but it was such a joy to sit there and ask questions about parts of the novel that felt like, well, maybe this isn't fully baked or maybe this isn't fully fleshed out. And to have Anne sit and have thought so deeply about each of these characters, like these characters were so real in Anne's mind that what I had read in the novel was just a snapshot of the full life that Anne had already imagined for them. And that was just thrilling, like to see that and to just feel like there was this whole world that we were getting to like tap into. So we were very bullish about wanting Anne to choose Dial and to let us publish Dear Edward. So Julie held an auction, and I don't know how much we want to talk about that, but we won.
I was saying, I think part of the magic was that, Anne was so clear that what she wanted was to come out of this process with the best version of the book that it could be, that she had done everything she could do on her end, and she wanted a partner who, first of all, I wanted to find her a home.
I didn't understand that at the time because I had published 2 books and they had been with different publishers, right. And they had been very far apart. It took me so long. And so Julie was like, I want you to find a home, a place that you stay. And I was like, I don't understand that because surely you want someone who falls in love with this specific book, and then you find someone who falls in love with the next specific book. But now I understand. I never had that kind of relationship before. So she knew more than me. Oh, and Whitney, when we went to that meeting too, I feel like it has to be mentioned that on this small little table that we ate lunch, she had her printed out copy of the book, and it had like 47,000 Post-its in it and like underlined line. She'd had it for like 3 days. And it's true, every editor meeting that we went to, they would make a pitch. Everybody was lovely. And then they would be like, what do you want to know? Or like there was a spreadsheet or something that I wanted to see, or like a pie graph or something of, I don't know, whatever. It was like, I just want to know how we can make the book better. That is all. And then when I came in and she had these 47 Post-its and had thought so deeply about the book and where it could be made better, that was what I wanted. Everything else was like very exciting and interesting, but that's what matters. Like there is this point where like when I sold it, I knew it was good, but I knew it could be better. And that is like, I wanted to publish it someplace where we could together bring it to that next place.
I think also there's this feeling that it was so weird. Like everyone fell in love with it. You did meetings with 12 or 13 different publishers. But I think I felt, and I know Susan felt, that moment of discovery, that moment of being an early reader of something and reading it, knowing you wanted to give it to as many people as you could, or the book clubs would want to discuss it. I think we felt like we could tighten a few screws and just make that like a guarantee, And so I think the marketing and the positioning and the way we wanted to publish it was almost like we knew that would all fall right into place when the book was what the book.
It all starts with the book. Yeah. It all comes down to the book and how special.
Yeah. So we edited. So we did a couple of rounds of edits, maybe 2 or 3. Yeah. 3. And then we decided. So June was when I acquired the book. We did another 6-7 months of editing, and then in December, it was ready to go. And then that's when I feel like it gets really fun, because
I think what's surprising to people, right, is that like you acquire a book in June, it gets finished in December, and then there's an entire year before it comes out.
That like 18 months when it got bought till when it comes out. Yeah. It is crazy, people.
But that was kind of really used. So a lot of what we do then is we start sending it to people. Julie and I were making lists of independent booksellers she knew and independent booksellers I knew, and booksellers and reviewers and people that my team wanted us to be in touch with. We were reaching out to other authors, getting endorsements. I think one of the things that we did, this came a little later, but Random House did a sort of focus group. We have a book club series that people can sign up for, and they can opt in to be a part of like an early reading crew. And so we sent the book out to a bunch of people, and they came into the office for an evening of discussion. And then based on a lot of what they said is sort of how we targeted our marketing. And a lot of people that evening told us, what I really wanted to be told about this book before I picked it up was that it would break my heart, but it would put it back together again. And we were like, great, we have a quote from J. Courtney Sullivan that says exactly that. Let's put it on the cover. I mean, so in that year, there's a lot of fine tuning and tweaking that happens so that you feel like you're introducing the book to the world in the best way.
I don't think people realize, like, so when you have the galley, or actually pre-galley in December, you were sending it to internal Random House salespeople.
Yeah.
And then when you have a galley, you're sending it to your salespeople in the field, and you're sending it to booksellers in independent bookstores around the country. That's right? Those are the...
Right, and those booksellers are looking at those galleys and thinking, in 6 months from now, I want 25 copies of this book because I can't wait to put it into people's hands.
Right. And I mean, we remember you and I went and visited some independent bookstores.
Yeah. I went on tour with McCann.
Yeah, we like went on a little tour just even before the book was available to consumers, but because we felt like we really wanted to introduce you and introduce this novel, and in a sort of selfish way, introduce the Dial Press to those booksellers. And then you also went and spoke with the librarian, like the annual librarian convention, so that we were really getting on the radar of librarians across the country.
And I think that's the thing that people don't, think about, but there's the person who writes the book, then there's the agent and the editor, but then there's like a massive team of people. There's people in marketing and people in sales. There's the art department. There's publicity. And this whole team is working on, this thing that you're going to walk past in the store and hopefully fall in love with, pick up and read and fall in love with. Mm-hmm. But first we've got to get your attention. We've got to get you to pick it up. We've got to get the bookstore to put it on the table. And then we've got to get you to pick it up off the table and pay for it. And there's so much love and passion and enthusiasm and commitment that goes into each and every book that goes out into the world. And I think that that's sort of forgotten along the way, but that's, we spent days, just like obsessing over the first 3 words in the first paragraph of the copy on the jacket, or, are the birds in the right position behind the title, and where's the embossing going to go, and all these little things that are part of the process. And when Anne and I were going around and talking to all these people, like, the second question after, how do we find the team that's going to make the book the best book? It's going to be, Whitney's that editor, but also, is this the team that's going to publish it with the most care and ambition? Because you want a group of people who are like, we're going to get this out and get it in front of all the readers. Like, what you want as an agent and an editor more than anything in the world is that lots of people read and discover this incredible book that is so special, and you just need people to pick it up to discover how special it is.
Yeah. So I think, are we supposed to take questions at a certain
questions? Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome. All right. This first question is from Denise. Have you been able to talk to anyone from the crash in 2010?
Initially, I never reached out to anyone. In the real crash, the boy's aunt and uncle came from Holland and adopted him right after the crash, and they brought him back to Holland. And they did an amazing job of protecting his privacy. They blacked out the windows of their station wagon so the press couldn't take pictures of him. They never gave another interview, and which is exactly the best possible scenario for them to do. It's very impressive. And I wouldn't have reached out to them anyway. I didn't actually, as a writer, didn't want to know what happened to the boy, because I wanted to write a story from my imagination. And if I had known some things, it would have made that, like, it would have counterweighted what I was making up and been, maybe led me in a direction that I wasn't sure I wanted to do. So, and also I would never want to bother them. They went through this horrific event. And the last thing, as a writer, it's obviously very common to have novels inspired by real events, but there's a discomfort in that too, certainly in this situation, where the last thing I want to have happen is for my book to come out and draw attention for them back on themselves after what they went through. Unfortunately, it's to some extent inevitable. And when the book did come out, right around when it came out, I received an email from the aunt of the boy who was his guardian, and she asked for a copy of the novel because she had heard about it. And she was very nice, and I was like, it's very fictional, it's 100% fictional, like 1,000% fictional, which it is. And she was very nice, but I haven't been in touch with them since then.
This next question is from Sally. I'm curious if you did any research on trauma or grief. You captured Edward's experience so accurately. Loved the book.
Thank you. Yes, I did. At the first year of the process, I was exclusively research and taking notes and thinking about the book. I didn't write during that year. I tried to figure out as much as I could without writing what I call pretty sentences, because when I write pretty sentences, like my brain departs and I like am intuitively writing the story as opposed to like cerebrally writing the story. And I needed to do a lot of research because I didn't know anything about plane crashes, this kind of trauma. So yes, I did a lot of reading about sole survivors of various events, about sort of adolescent development, sort of in trauma. And then also at a certain point, I heavily used Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like that triangle that you see that you can Google, that is like about our human needs. And the bottom fattest part of the triangle is like the first thing that we absolutely need is shelter and food, a roof over our heads. And then the next step above that is security. We need to feel safe. And then above that is connection with other people. And then like the very top, the tiny part is self-embodiment, sort of like the fullest version of ourselves. And so I used that to sort of tie Edward's progress to very loosely, so that he was moving in a direction, even though his actual, I don't like the word recovery because I don't feel like he recovers, but like he would take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, which is what happens when you're in grief. But there was this overarching path that I had him on. So yes, I did a lot of research for that.
This next question is for Julie. Is it unusual for an agent to make editor style comments as you did in the Italian restaurant, and thus have such a personal investment in the book so early on?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know how a lot of other agents work. I know that for me, and I know this is true for my colleagues at the book group, being editorially involved in the book early on is really, really important to us. I mean, I never sign a project that I don't spend at least 3 to 6, if not 9 months working on before I send it out into the marketplace. It's not even so much that it changes my personal investment. I think for me, part of it is what I really love. Like, I love editing and I love being an editor, and I know I'm passionate about a manuscript when I read it, and I think I have all these ideas and I can't wait, you know, and it's like, oh, you should move this, and I really want to talk more about this character and just start here, and like I get really excited by that process. And I think, I mean, I think I'm good at it. So it's fun because I think I that's a skill that I have, and it's fun to exercise that muscle. I also just think on a very practical level, you are going to have more success in the marketplace, meaning more people, more editors who are ready to make an offer and bigger offers and more enthusiasm if the book is in the best possible shape it can be in when it goes out. So I don't let it go out into the marketplace until I've done every single thing I can do. Sometimes I hit a wall. Like sometimes I've worked on a manuscript for a year and I've done 4 line edits and I'm just like, I know there's more, but I no longer can see it. So we're going to send it out and, you know, there's going to be more to do. But I really love that process. And I know all of my colleagues at the book group really love that process. I know a lot of the agents that I'm friends with really love that part. I don't know a lot of agents that don't do that, although I know that there are agents that don't. And that's really a personal choice for a writer, is like, are you looking for that agent? Are you looking for somebody who, every once in a while I talk to a writer and I'm like, here's my vision. And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's not your vision.
It's a good way to screen your client.
It is, because you should share. I mean, you have to see eye to eye on it.
I heard this really great. I was actually saying to Whit that I listened to a podcast recently of one of her writers Alexi Pappas, who has a memoir out now called Bravey that I haven't read yet, but I heard Alexi on the podcast, and she was talking about being edited and receiving feedback. And she was like, I think of it as, I thought this was so interesting. She said, I think of it as blood work. Like, if you don't get your blood work done, you have high cholesterol, but you just don't know about it. So you're walking around with high cholesterol. And if you don't have anyone read your work, it doesn't mean there's not all sorts of like issues in it. You just don't know about them.
That's great. Yeah.
You have to get your blood work done so that you know what's actually going on. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I mean,
yeah. I have to say, editing. So Alexi, just for a second, Alexi is an Olympian. She ran and she's a runner. Is a runner and ran in the Olympics. And editing her was fascinating because she's so used to being coached, and I just don't usually. And so you would get on the phone with her and go through stuff and talk about it. And she was just like so game, and she would end every call with a plan of like, well, here's the plan, you know? And I would always get on the phone, and I worked on it with a younger editor on my team. And I would always get off the phone and say, we're only working with Olympians from now on. Inspiring, whatever. So I'm glad to hear you quoting her.
Yeah, she was on the Rich Roll podcast. It was a really great interview, actually, for writing and inspiring you as a human being. I mean, she is clearly a lovely, very impressive human.
Lots of book clubs read it. That's awesome. We have one more question from the audience. This is from Amy. In the book, you referred to some of the other kids being jealous of Edward, especially those who had their own personal tragedies, but not with the same attention that Edward got. And I wondered why you chose not to follow up on that storyline and how you saw their jealousy affecting Edward.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. I thought it was, well, when I wrote Edward, when I was writing Edward, I was in Edward. So a lot of it was not strategic. It wasn't like I felt like I needed to have a certain element, but I did feel really aware that this is a complicated world, and this boy had one of the worst things that you can imagine happen to him. But he was picked up by a really loving family who he has enough money. He is going to get more money because of insurance from the crash. He's a white boy, and he's going to be okay. And there are other children his age who are in such worse situations who do not have like the media following them around, or Instagram posts about them, or girls crying about how sad they are on his behalf, and people bending over backwards, as people do in Edward's life, to make him okay. And it hadn't occurred to him, because that's understandable. He's living in this terrible experience, but it was important to me that he know that. And also it was just realistic that of course some kids at that school were going to be resentful and hate him, because that would be the case, and understandably so. And it wasn't more of the storyline, because it felt like that needed to be there, that truth needed to be there, but it wasn't really one that he did try to respond with the money that was given to him, and the way that he sort of had framed his life as he sort of begins to engage with the world later in the novel is more about like, how can I help from this place of privilege, which is counterintuitive, because it's very hard to think of yourself as privileged when you lost your family. But so all of that needed to be there. And that's why it's there.
All right. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic time. Thank you, guys. Thank you for writing this amazing book. Dear Edward is now available in paperback, and you can get it by clicking that green button. And Anne is so awesome, and she autographed book plates for everyone who purchases it with An Unlikely Story. Thank you so much, Anne. And thank you, Whitney and Julie, for this fantastic event.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.